Hi, today in this module I will discuss about biodiversity and the Millennium Developmental Goals. Biodiversity and sustainable development are inextricably linked. Biodiversity is the variety of gene, species, ecosystem and wealth of ecosystem processes and ecosystem functions. Biological diversity, as we know, is the sustainable block for sustainable food, health and livelihood security. It is a life insurance for human development. Biodiversity provides the valuable resources and sustainable food and health for not only for this generation, it has provided in the past. The present generation is also dependent on biodiversity and biological resources, and future generation will also depend on its sustenance for biological resources provided by biodiversity and ecosystem services provided by biodiversity. The biodiversity directly or indirectly yield a number of valuable things, for example, food, fodder, fuel, health, medicine. Beside that, indirectly provisioning services, for example, fresh air and water, nutrient cycling, climate regulation, etc. for the sustenance of life into this earth. The Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, were formally established when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Millennium Declaration in September 2000. Through a set of targets, the Millennium Development Goals have targeted to achieve the sustainable development and poverty eradication. This is a framework through which the development process or sustainable development can be measured. It is also reassured or reinforced among the international community to form the policies and goals for sustainable development. We see that biodiversity and developmental goals or Millennium Developmental Goals are interrelated. The Sustainable Developmental Goals, which are new goals which has been proposed, 17 goals, and Millennium Developmental Goals, both cannot be achieved without the conservation of biodiversity. It is also recognized in the Convention of Biological Diversity. If we see the Convention of Biological Diversity, it is a landmark agreement in the Earth Summit, which is one convention which focuses on conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use and equitable sharing of profits arise out of biological resources. Through its conference of parties, the convention has target 2010 goals for conservation of biodiversity. These were also accepted or adopted by Johannesburg in 2002 conventions, and these goals were eradicate or to target the conservation of biological diversity. Through its We Have framework, which is water, energy, health, agriculture and biodiversity, which is called the We Have framework or WSSD, it deals in biodiversity with every nook and corner. We can see that biodiversity is cornerstone not only for water and food security, for energy, for health and for agriculture sustainability and food security. The Millennium Developmental Goals ranges from, there are 8 goals which ranges from eradication of poverty and hunger to child mortality, improvement of maternal health, disease removal, HIV, AIDS, malaria, environmental sustainability and the global development. Through the conservation of biological diversity is directly adopted in MDG 7 through biodiversity conservation in environmental sustainability. The other goals also have indirect relationship with biodiversity conservation. MDG 1 or Millennium Development Goal 1, which is eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, it targets that the Poverty and hunger should be eradicated. How? Between 1990 and 2015, the proportion of people whose income is less than $1 a day. And how? Between 1990 and 2015, the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. If we see Millennium Developmental Goal 1, it addresses issues of extreme poverty, hunger and malnutrition, which are closely related to livelihoods and vulnerability of households. The poor, if we see that basically more of the poor people are found in marginal lands where they are totally dependent on their livelihood on biological resources for their food, fuel, fodder or NTF, they depend on biological resources. If this biological diversity is being lost, their livelihood, there is threat to their livelihood, their income generation and their survival. The various aspects of biodiversity are of direct and indirect importance to food availability, food security, health, nutrition, household development, income generation and vulnerability. So, in a way we can say that poor people are more dependent on biological resources for their survival because they are the people who use biological diversity directly for their day-to-day activity, for their livelihood, for their food availability, for their health, nutritional security and household development beside income generation. The second MDG, Millennium Developmental Goal, it is to achieve universal primary education, and it target ensure that by 2015 children everywhere, either they are boys or girls alike, will be able to complete a full course of primary schooling. So, goal 2 deals with primary education. The goal 3 promote gender equality and empower women. The target is eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education, preferably by 2005 and in all levels of education no later than 2015. If we try to find out the link between gender and education, we will find that they are directly linked. In fragile land or in places where there is scarcity of water, usually the women or the children, they go in search of water to far off place. Few studies have shown that in search of water they have to walk more than 4 or 5 kilometers, which may take time or use their time more than 2 hours or so. So, this much time is wasted in the water search. So, the time they may spend or they could spend in school, in their education, in their studies is being reduced. So, the water which is directly or indirectly provided, the biodiversity is linked with the education and gender. If we see, the conservation of water resources and associated biodiversity can substantially reduce the burden on women and girl child to focus attention on education and livelihood improvement. The time they spend in search of water can be used for education and livelihood improvement. If we see the link between biodiversity and the health goal, the goal 4, reduce child mortality, it also linked with biodiversity. The target of this goal 4 is reduce by 2/3 between 1990 and 2015 the under 5 mortality rate. The goal 5, again it deals with health goals, that is improve maternal health. The target is reduce by 3/4 between 1990 and 2015 the maternal mortality rate. And goal 6, which deals with combat HIV, AIDS, malaria and other diseases. The target is it should halted by 2015 and begin to reverse the spread of HIV, AIDS, have halted by 2015 and begin to reverse the incidence of malaria and other major diseases. we see that biodiversity provides us number of health benefits besides the human well-being. The ecosystem services are directly linked with human health, and it also provides a number of medicines which are used for combat various diseases and other health problems. So biodiversity play a crucial role not only in providing medicines to deal with issues of health and nutrition, but it also play a significant role in dealing with diseases like malaria and others. According to an estimate of World Health Organization, 80% of the world's population from developing countries, they relies mainly on traditional medicine for primary health care. There are a number of companies whose turnover is dependent on the medicines which is provided by the various type of biological resources. If we see that out of 119 chemical compounds, they are derived out of them, the compounds from 90 plant species, and 74% of these are used as drug. So these estimates give us a very good example of how biodiversity or biological resources contribute for human health, which is also of one of the Millennium Developmental Goal to be achieved. The goal 7, it deals with ensure environmental sustainability. The environmental sustainability and biodiversity is directly linked. This is also has been targeted in Convention of Biological Diversity. Through Conference of Party, in its 10th Conference of Party, the Aichi Biodiversity Targets has been adopted, which is Strategic Plan for Biodiversity Conservation 2010-11 to 2020. This is also marked as a decade for biodiversity conservation. Through these targets, through this strategic plan of 2010 to 2011 to 2020, the Millennium Developmental Goal target for environmental sustainability. The targets are: it integrates the principle of sustainable development in countries' policies and programs and reverse the loss of environmental resources. The targets are: should halve by 2015 the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water, half achieved by 2020, a significant improvement in the lives at least 100 million slum dwellers. If we see that the current estimates are that approximately 1 billion people are affected by soil erosion and land degradation due to deforestation, overgrazing and agriculture. Water scarcity is a major issue in more than 20 developing countries. Over 2 billion people continue to rely on biomass fuels and traditional technology for cooking and heating, and up to 2 billion people have no access to electricity. If we see the challenges for development for environmental sustainability, it should ensure that biodiversity and environment continue to provide goods and services needed for human development. There are a number of drivers of biodiversity loss besides changing climate, invasive alien species, overexploitation, habitat degradation, habitat fragmentation. If these drivers continue to operate, the goods and services and ecosystem services provided by biodiversity will be lost, and the billion of population which is dependent on these biological resources for their livelihood will suffer. Not only that, it is also harm the environmental sustainability. So these goods and services need to be continued, need to be saved for human development. One should ensure that cost and benefits from the use of such goods and services are substantially, sustainably and equitably shared. This is also one of the goal of or the objective of Convention of Biological Diversity, that equitable sharing of benefits arising out of biological resources. The development should ensure that policies influencing sustainability are developed based on participatory approach. It may be community-based ecosystem services, or in which all communities, all people who are directly linked should be involved for making policies which are directly related for their sustainability. The scientific and technological impacts on services provided by biodiversity, one should ensure that these should be assessed and the solution for ecosystem friendly alternative and efficiency be found. The goal 8th, which is develop a global partnership for development, it focuses on means of achieving the first 7 goals. Let it be eradication of poverty and hunger, education, gender equality, reducing the mortality rate, maternal health. These all are focuses by the mean of goal 8 that develop a global partnership for development. In the spirit of this goal, developed and developing countries need to work in partnership to address various sustainability issues. Now coming from Millennium Developmental Goal to Sustainable Developmental Goal. The Millennium Developmental Goal, they aims to achieve the different goal up to 2015. The Sustainable Developmental Goal in the Rio Plus 20 to its 2030 agenda, it is again targeting for the sustainable development. The role of biodiversity is more, or the biodiversity has been given more importance in Sustainable Developmental Goal than Millennium Developmental Goal. In Millennium Developmental Goal, we are indirectly talking about biodiversity except in MDG 8, MDG 7, which is environmental sustainability. But in Sustainable Developmental Goal, in most of the goals, directly these are linked with biodiversity and conservation of biodiversity, either by food security or by sustainable agriculture or by conservation of terrestrial ecosystem or marine ecosystem. The Sustainable Developmental Goals are, the Sustainable Developmental Goal 1 is end poverty in all its forms everywhere. The SDG 2 is end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So it deals with food security, which agriculture diversity can provide, which through sustainability of the agriculture can be achieved not only the food security but also the nutritional security to the hungers of present billions of people who are present on this earth and who directly depend upon their survival on biodiversity, and promote sustainable agriculture, which is sustainable, which can provide the benefits for long term to present generation as well as future generation without harming the environment. The SDG 3 ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, and SDG 4 ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunity for all. SDG 5 deals with gender equality and it achieves gender equality and empower all women and girls. SDG 6 is ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. SDG 7 ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all, and SDG 8 promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. The Sustainable Developmental Goal 9 build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. SDG 10 reduce inequality within and among countries. SDG 11 makes cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable, and SDG 12 ensure sustainable consumption and production pattern. The SDG 13, 14 and 15, you can see that it is directly linked with biodiversity. Like SDG 13 said that take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. We know that climate change is one of the major driver of biodiversity loss. Because of changing climate, the biodiversity is being lost at a very fast speed. It is also giving rise to various diseases and eradication of various type of biological resources or biodiversity which is useful and contributing to the loss of biodiversity. SDG 14, it directly deals with conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. So it talks about the resources, the biological resources, biodiversity which is found on ocean, sea and marine. The Sustainable Developmental Goal 15, it says the protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem, sustainably manage forest, combat desertification and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. So we can see that these three goals, beside other goals, they directly talk about conservation of biodiversity and enforce that biodiversity conservation should be incorporated invariably in all the policies and goals for sustainable development. The sustainable development and biodiversity conservation go hand in hand. They are intertwined. They cannot dealt separately. So if we are dealing with conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of biodiversity, equitable sharing of profits arising out of biodiversity, which is also objective of Convention of Biological Diversity, it will be easy to achieve the Millennium Developmental Goal as well as Sustainable Developmental Goals. The Sustainable Developmental Goal 16, it promotes peaceful and inclusive society for sustainable development. It provides access to justice for all and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. The SDG 17 strengthen the means of implementation and vitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. So through these MDGs and now SDGs, the United Nations is targeting to achieve the sustainable development to secure the future generations' biological resources as well as the present generation's biological resources and sustainable developmental for all, environmental sustainability for everyone. To summarize, the Millennium Developmental Goals mark a historic and effective method of global mobilization to achieve a set of important social priorities worldwide. These Millennium Developmental Goals, they express widespread public concern about poverty, hunger, disease, unmet schooling, gender, inequality and environmental degradation. If we see that the biodiversity, it plays a very important role in ensuring the target of MDGs for sustainable development are successfully achieved, whether this is related to poverty, health, child mortality rate, disease or environmental sustainability. Biodiversity play a very prominent role. The critical role of biodiversity in sustainable development was also recognized in the Rio Plus 20 outcome, the future we want. So, if we want sustainable development, we want to eradicate poverty, we want to have a healthy ecosystem for everybody, biodiversity should be integrated into all overreaching goals. It should address broad concepts such as poverty eradication, an inclusive green economy, human well-being and sustainable development. Thank you.